When you go on a family trip to a large amusement park, you are likely to take a few things with you to make your day a little more memorable. Swimsuit, sunscreen, kids who are too short or too young to ride anything outside of a children's ride, so you leave them in the kids area while you ride a roller coaster, where then the employees call the cops on you for child neglect. I have done this, and you end up the rest of your vacation in a government-ran resort. Memorable! And you also bring a camera to take pictures of your family on rides, your family eating junk food, your family being proud of you for being hauled off by the police, and your family with the park mascot or cartoon character from the park. Amusement parks and cartoons. The two seem like a perfect combination and have had a working relationship for decades. Mascots are used to entice kids into visiting the park with the characters they have seen on their television screens. And there's usually a whole section dedicated to these characters at the park. Sometimes they even have whole parks dedicated to these characters. And sometimes amusement parks create their own characters and use them as the mascots for their park. But the question is, do amusement parks need to use cartoon characters for their parks? The answer is, it's complicated. The reason why I say this is because there are two different kinds of parks when it comes to using cartoons, movies, and TV series for their theming. There are the parks that are built around these characters, such as Disney, Universal, and Lego. And then there are the parks where the characters are outshadowed by the rides, such as Cedar Fair and Six Flags parks. This all possibly started with the most famous character of them all, Santa Claus. Santa Claus Land in Santa Claus, Indiana, now Holiday World, opened in 1946, where the entire park was built around the Santa Claus theme. Soon other parks followed, as Santa-themed lands popped up all over the place. Each park was immersive when it came to the theming. You felt like you were swept into another world. A lot of parks did this, not only with the Santa Claus theme, but other themes as well, such as the Wild West theme, or experiencing the rest of the world without leaving the USA, or entering a storybook or nursery rhyme. These are theme parks, and these themes tend to be the park's drawing power. But hey, if nursery rhymes and Santa could draw people to the park, then so could a cartoon star, right? Enter Walt Disney. While there were plenty of parks around the world at the time, and some probably used cartoon characters in their kids' areas, not legally of course, they would just be paintings and cutouts, most of the time these parks were really immersive. Walt's vision was to have a totally immersive experience using his characters. But he limited this experience to just the fantasy land in his park, Disneyland. Although Disneyland has 5 or 6 lands in the park, with plenty of attractions, they are not the reason why you go to a Disney park. You go to a Disney park to see the characters that you and your kids grew up with. Those characters would be Mickey Mouse and his friends. They are the draw, and the park is built around this. In fact, the cartoons continues to be built around this concept, with the additions of Cars Land, Toy Story Lands, and Star Wars Lands. These characters are what brings people to the park. Universal does the same thing. Although Universal and NBC are terrible when it comes to children's and family entertainment outside of the parks. I mean, come on, America's Got Talent is not a family-friendly show when you have to bleep out the words. The company does a great job of using characters to draw people to their parks. Marvel superheroes, Jurassic Park, and Harry Potter. People are drawn to these parks because they want to feel like what it's like to go to Hogwarts or go to Jurassic Park. People want these experiences. For Legoland, it is to be surrounded by buildings and characters made out of Legos. Gimmicks like these work for these kinds of parks, but do they work for the more traditional kind of parks as well? Do cartoons, movies, and TV characters bring people to Six Flags, Cedar Point, Elitch Gardens, or Coney Island? That would be a no. People do not want to come to these parks because they want to visit Bugs Bunny, Batman, or Snoopy. They come to these parks because of their rides. Most notably, their coasters. They also go to these parks simply because, most of the time, they do not have a choice. Sometimes you live in a community where you don't have much in the way of amusement parks to go to. A good example is Denver, Colorado. Denver has 2 amusement parks. One that can't grow, Elitch Gardens, and one that refuses to grow, Lakeside. The people of Denver are stuck with these 2 options and have no choice than to go to these parks, or drive extremely long hours to go to another park with more variety. Now, both Lakeside and Elitch parks do not have a good variety of coasters. Lakeside has 4 coasters, a wooden coaster, a wild mouse, a family coaster, and a kiddie coaster. Elitch has a wooden coaster and a suspended coaster, and pretty much 4 coasters that pretty much do the same thing. Go back and forth. In fact, the closest park that gives the people of Denver more options is around 8 hours away. Now, the reason why people do go to the major amusement parks is, of course, the roller coasters. It's not because of the cartoon characters or even superheroes. Six Flags is notorious for adding superhero rides all over their parks. But people do not go to these parks to ride a ride named after Superman or the Green Lantern or Batman. They do not go to Six Flags parks for a well-themed Bugs Bunny land. If that was the case, Geauga Lake would still be around, and parks like Lagoon or Cedar Point would not be doing so well. Six Flags even had financial problems throughout the early 2000s. Even with Batman, they still have financial problems. Well, that and they overstuffed their parks. Seriously, with Geauga Lake, moderation might have been the key, and the park may still be around. So cartoons and comic book characters are not the real draw to these kinds of parks. However, that does not mean people don't have fond memories of them. To this day, people wish for Hanna-Barbera to return to Kings Island and Kings Dominion. But that's not going to happen. Here's why. When Kings Island was built, it was built by the Taft Broadcasting Company in 1972, a company located in Cincinnati, Ohio. This company owned the rights to Hanna-Barbera and its characters. You know, characters like Scooby-Doo, Fred Flintstone, and Yogi Bear. Much like how Disney owns the rights to Mickey Mouse and their version of Cinderella. Taft Broadcasting owned the rights to the Hanna-Barbera characters until 1991, which ironically was a year before the major expansion of Kings Island's Hanna-Barbera lands, and 2 years before Kings Island was sold to Paramount. Since Taft did own the Hanna-Barbera characters in the early years of Kings Island, they could keep the Hanna-Barbera lands up to date. With the introduction of Jabberjaw, Scrappy-Doo, and the Smurfs on television, they were almost instantly added to the parks without a problem. This is the most notable reason why Kings Island had a Smurf Dark ride a few years after the show started. However, when the characters in the park were sold to two different companies, it would be harder and harder to keep the Hanna-Barbera lands up to date. The reason for this is because the new owners of Kings Island, Paramount, now had to pay for the rights of the Hanna-Barbera characters to use in their parks. And they now had to pay for show by show, not just as a group. This is the reason why, in the last expansion of the Hanna-Barbera lands in 1998, the park didn't update their rides with the characters and shows that were relevant and current at the time. Shows like Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, Captain Planet, Two Stupid Dogs, and SWAT Cats. These characters would cost more than the park was willing to pay. Slowly over the next 8 years, the current Hanna-Barbera in the parks would be less and less relevant. And part of it is because the parks couldn't or wouldn't keep the content up to date. Another part is because Hanna-Barbera died in 2001, when their name changed to Cartoon Network Studios. Hanna-Barbera exists in name only, and that is only on the cartoons from the 1960s to the 1990s. Although under another name, all the shows being made under the Cartoon Network Studios could still be considered Hanna-Barbera. Shows like Adventure Time, Ben 10, Steven Universe, We Bare Bears, Uncle Grandpa, and so on and so forth. Another part is because Cartoon Network Studios is now owned by Time Warner, who is in competition with Paramount because Paramount owns Nickelodeon. We'll get to that soon. It's hard to keep these areas relevant with cartoon characters that you do not own. And to tell the truth, as much as we adults have fond memories of these characters in these areas of these parks, these areas are not designed for us. They are designed for kids and to draw kids to these areas. They need to remain up to date with the current characters that the kids love. This is the reason why Nickelodeon was brought to Kings Island as well. Paramount's parent company, Viacom, owns the network and could afford to put these characters in the park to keep their content up to date. When Cedar Fair bought the park, Nickelodeon was no longer theirs. It would cost a lot of money to buy the rights to all the shows that were in Kings Island and to keep it relevant. Unfortunately, Cedar Fair uses characters that are no longer relevant, with the exception of the Peanuts movie, but they can afford it. They did the same thing with Bernstein Bears. But Cedar Fair isn't the only park that has a problem with keeping the rights to popular cartoon characters. Case in point, Six Flags. We all know that Six Flags is a park with Bugs Bunny and has an obsession with DC superheroes, no matter how bad their movies are. Really? We're doing the portal opening to another world cliche again for the 5th time this summer? Oddly enough, Six Flags does have a kind of a Hanna-Barbera land, which was once called Camp Cartoon Network at Six Flags Great America. It actually came out in 1998 as well. But this one actually had Cow and Chicken, Johnny Bravo, and Dexter's Laboratory. It lasted 10 years, which is about right for contracts for cartoon series in amusement parks. Great America kept the old Hanna-Barbera cartoon characters and did away with the Cartoon Network ones in 2008. However, in 2007, Six Flags did start to bring in other licensed properties to their parks. They were children's areas based off of children's programs such as The Wiggles and Thomas the Tank Engine. These areas only lasted for 4 years, as they were removed for the 2011 season. The reason? The cost was too much for the company to keep the license. Especially since Six Flags just emerged out of bankruptcy. Again, the company doesn't need cartoon characters and superheroes to bring people to their park. Another problem is the longevity of cartoons. Disney and early tap Paramount parks can keep up with the current trends since they own the cartoons. Other parks aren't so lucky. If a smaller park wants to have a land based off of a current cartoon character, then there's a risk. That risk is investing in something that might not be on TV for over a year. We all know that there are 2 reasons why a cartoon series will not last. 1, the ratings are poor. 2, it didn't sell enough toys. Worlds of Fun is a victim of licensing. Not 1, but 2 series that did not last for the park. They featured at one point Rainbow Bright and Shirt Tales at the park. Each series would last only 1 or 2 years on the air before it was canceled. Thank goodness the park didn't theme a land around them. Another example is Dorney Park and the Care Bears. The Care Bears lasted at Dorney for 5 years, starting in 1988. Unfortunately, by the time the Care Bears were introduced at the park, their popularity may have been up since they just finished the series. It's really hard to tell. Also back in the 1990s, an amusement park called Darien Lake bought the license to feature Popeye the Sailor Man at the park. Popeye was a little more popular in the 1990s, thanks to syndication and Turner Broadcasting not giving a damn of what they aired on their channels back then. He could have been a little bit more popular now. Damn you, Sony! But even back then, he was still a little passé. Popeye at Darien Lake didn't last long, only lasting for 3 seasons before Six Flags took over. It's hard to keep kids' areas relevant in amusement parks with ever-changing trends. Even the Looney Tunes have lost their relevancy over the years, even with the new series that they have out now. Someone kill me now. The only way to keep up to date is if the parks were owned by the cartoon studios themselves. Otherwise, it's not really worth it for the parks, again, since the cartoons are not the reason why people go to major theme parks. Unless they are named Disney, Universal, or Lego. Paramount Parks tried. Not only with Nickelodeon, but with movies as well. Starting in 1992, they started naming their new rides after movies. Top Gun, Days of Thunder, Tomb Raider, Wayne's World, etc. The problem was, the parks that these rides were put in were already heavily themed. This became an issue, because, like Six Flags did with superhero rides, the park placed these rides in any area, and the rides tended to be out of place. The rides are heavily themed themselves, but no one came to the parks because of it. Not like Universal does, where they have whole sections dedicated to one movie or theme. The theming was sporadic throughout Paramount Parks, and made the parks look sloppy. Even when Kings Island themed the location in a park after a movie studio, they did an awful job of it. From 91 to 98, they did an amazing job of theming their rides. In 1999, Kings Island added Paramount Action Zone, themed after a movie studio. They added Drop Zone and Face Off, named after 2 of their movies, with no theming. A year later, they added Son of Beast to this area, with no theming. What was the point of changing a jungle theme area into a movie studio area when you're not going to theme the rides? Tomb Raider and Italian Job were 2 rides that were added later in different areas of the park that had better theming. But again, the park was just adding movie-themed attractions in random places, and they weren't really a draw to the park because of theming. In 2006, Cedar Fair bought Paramount Parks and removed most of the movie themes. And the parks still do well without them. In fact, they are doing better than they were. One thing I find amusing is amusement parks overseas use American cartoons more than American parks do. Parks that are not owned by Viacom have Nickelodeon lands in England, Germany, Australia, and Malaysia. America has 1, with 1 on its way. There are at least 3 or 4 Cartoon Network lands in other countries, with America not having a single one. Camp Cartoon Network doesn't count, they kicked the characters out a long time ago. There are 3 or 4 DreamWorks lands outside of the United States. What does America have? Shrek motion simulators? Of course, now that Comcast actually owns DreamWorks characters, they will be added to Universal Parks. But again, they now own the characters. The parks outside of the United States that have DreamWorks characters are not owned by DreamWorks. So what's stopping parks from inside of the United States from having them? There are parks that still use the old Hanna-Barbera characters. In fact, some of them use them better than the old tap broadcasting parks did. Not to mention the parks that use some of the country's own characters. But why are parks like these able to use these characters when American parks have such a hard time? Could the problems be summed up in 2 words? American parks? That's a huge possibility. We have to face the unfortunate fact that Americans live in an expensive country. Building expenses, food and merchandise inventories, insurance, electricity, workers' wages, taxes. There are a lot of things that are more important to a park than a license to use a cartoon or movie character in the park. Theming tends to be on the back burner as well for most parks in America. Unfortunately, the things mentioned above can be a lot cheaper in other countries, so overseas parks can afford advanced theming and cartoon usage. And believe me, when it comes to theming, Dollywood's nice. But it's nothing compared to Phantasialand in Germany. Yes, it is fun to see kids light up when they see SpongeBob, Snoopy, Bugs Bunny, and other cartoon characters. It is fun to go to Disney to immerse ourselves in one of their movie-themed attractions. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on the park and the cartoon. There's still parks that use cartoons from Nickelodeon and DreamWorks. There's always going to be some kind of park using recent or past cartoons to keep kids occupied. Sometimes legally, sometimes not. As children, we are excited when we visit these characters. As adults, we love and cherish these memories. As parents, we love seeing our children's eyes light up when they themselves see their childhood heroes for the first time. The cartoons may not draw people to seasonal parks, but our memories of them are still precious. I now have a Patreon account. This is where you can show your support and help me to improve my content by becoming a Patreon. You can get rewards by supporting me, such as seeing content before it's released, exclusive artwork, make requests for reviews, and you can even take part in a review. A link to this and all of my social media accounts are in the description. Thanks for watching. I'm Tunamp. It's time for me to tune out.